First person that came running out of a ditch with a gun was a little boy. And Jason said, I don't want to kill no kid. And his fellow Marines said, take him out.
What's up, guys? So I watched this video earlier this week and I felt like I could add a little bit to it because I really like the video because it brings up a lot of things that people don't think of, and I think it's important for, fellow military veterans to realize these things. Granted, I was never a soldier, I was never in the Army, but I was in the Navy. So in a lot of respects, especially considering this isn't talking about, combat, it's the opposite of that. It's talking about the actual things that cause the majority of suicides and mental health issues in the military. So that's why. So here it goes.
The question that I want to ask you is, what do you think the correlation is between deployment or going to combat or war? What's the correlation between deployment and suicide? I want everybody to participate. How many people thinking about that story of Jason, that there's a high correlation between deployment and suicide? And how many of you think that there is a medium correlation between deployment and suicide? And then how many of you think that there is a low correlation? So most of you believe that there is a high correlation between deployment and suicide. So the first thing that I want to teach you is that there is no correlation between deployment and suicide. What that means simply is that there are just as many soldiers who die by suicide who have deployed or gone into war as those soldiers who have never gone into war.
I think that's a really important thing to point out because people always associate the mental health problems in the military and military veterans with PTSD and combat. When for both ships that I was on, I saw just as many breakdowns happen with people that had been on deployment as in combat, as did I see with people that had never gone and seen combat. A big issue is that people normally join around the age of 19 on average, and have likely never experienced an environment anywhere near as stressful as the military, and are not even at the average age of onset for mental health problems. So they had no way of knowing that they had the potential to have these issues. Then they're put into a stressful environment. Then when the issues come out, in a large way, they're, considered or made to feel like they're weak and are just, don't have the, right amount of discipline for the military.
Today, I want to talk to you about why men should be allowed to cry, why soldiers should be allowed to talk, and pain should be allowed to be shared. Today, I want to give you some insights that might help you understand the emotional fortresses that soldiers and veterans learn to build.
Now, this is more of just a general idea about masculinity and, many societies throughout, the world and throughout history. But the first step for me to getting in touch with a lot of the negative emotions that I had repressed and was, running away from was allowing myself to cry and to feel bad and not feel bad about that. As soon as I let myself cry, in a way, it kind of became an addiction. And that's when I was able to finally face these emotions directly.
When a little girl falls down and hurts her knee, we go into the high voice. Oh, my baby all right? Let me kiss that boo-boo. Or can I put a Band-Aid on that owie? But when a little boy falls, the message is very different. We say things like, get up and stop crying, because boys don't cry. Or worse yet, we say things like, get up and stop crying before I give you something to cry about.
One time when I was 11, I actually fell off the stairs right outside our mobile home at the time and landed right on my knee. It's like scratched my knee to, to Hades. And my mom actually stood up and was too busy laughing to actually help me out.
And so the military has endless versions of this. Endless versions. Suck it up. Drink water. Drive on. There are even people, when we lose a loved one, who would tell us to pull it together so that we can be strong for somebody else.
Now, if you're stationed in 7th Fleet, which mainly consists of ports in Japan, you are automatically entitled to 30 extra days of leave because you're technically always on deployment because you're never in the US. When my sister committed suicide, I requested to take this extra leave in tandem with my emergency leave, since I was going to have to use that leave for emergency leave anyway, and I wanted to spend 2 weeks back home and 2 weeks in Japan by myself just to clear my head, and it was actually denied even though I was entitled to it. Because it sounded like I was just trying to have fun in Japan, and that's a bad thing to want to do apparently.
It's not always the obvious things that can take us out. Until recently, the Department of Veterans Affairs was reporting that we were losing 22 veterans a day to suicide. The new number suggests that we're losing 20 veterans a day. That's still 7,400 veterans that we lose each year to suicide. And of those 7,400 veterans that we lost in 2014, 70% was not receiving services from the VA. So the first thing that I taught you is that there is no correlation between deployment and suicide. So soldiers don't suicide because of deployment. The soldiers don't suicide because they're afraid of the enemy. And soldiers in war look forward to coming home. But once home, some soldiers ask to return to war.
So I might get some hate for this, but I have to be honest. Whenever I was young and naive and, stupid as, you could possibly imagine in my early 20s, I wanted to go to the Middle East, and I would actually get excited when we were on missions, like when we were tracking submarines. That aspect didn't scare me. I've experienced an actual general quarters whenever, which is where everyone mans their battle stations. But it turned out it actually wasn't real. But back then I was reckless, I was bold. I wanted to go and do things. That didn't scare me. What scared me was, showing up late to work or messing up on some paperwork. Then, the next thing I know, I'm getting demoted over a small, simple error that wasn't even related to the actual task that I would be charged with, derelicting or whatever. Whenever I wake up having a panic attack in the morning because I think I might be late for class, that says something right there.
In a study that I did with other military researchers at Fort Bragg, we found in looking at suicides in the Army Reserve that there were 3 primary stressors that were present in most of the suicides that we investigated. The first stressor was relationship problems. The second stressor was financial problems. And the third stressor was legal problems.
Every suicide attempt I was cognizant of while I was in the military was over relationships. One was over a unrequited love situation. One was over a divorce, and one was over a breakup. It's hard, especially if you live in Japan, to develop a long-term relationship or, a healthy relationship that isn't toxic and isn't just purely physical, because it's very common to get cheated on, or, divorce is very high. I mean, that's common throughout the military. But, and I have, a bunch of experience from being in Japan. The type of women that, or vice versa, that people end up being with or that you're surrounded with aren't always the best. I'll leave it at that, but yeah.
So now that we know what lethal stressors look like, how do we defeat them? Well, first, let's look at what we know about soldiers. They're not good at asking for help. They wear camouflage that allows them to hide in plain sight, but so too are they able to hide their feelings and emotions and pain and sorrow in plain sight. Soldiers are not allowed to whine, and the mission always comes first. And soldiers don't always have somebody to share their experience with. My experience with soldiers and veterans is soldiers like to talk to other soldiers about their experiences. Veterans like to talk to other veterans about their experiences. And because we believe that they are strong, we don't always do a good job of checking in on them to see how they're doing. And despite what we've been told, soldiers are not invincible. So while soldiers are not afraid of dying, some soldiers find it difficult to find a reason to keep living.
Now, this was a big issue with me for several years. I almost felt guilty having my issues since I had never seen combat. But after years of, spending the majority of the year out at sea and, never forming any type of relationship that wasn't toxic, or any type of relationship in general, to be honest, I knew nothing of what to do with myself outside of work than to go to bars and hang out with bar girls and the whole bar scene. I never really had a chance to, develop my hobbies and my interests because I was always not necessarily focused on work, but in an environment where I was surrounded by work. And for the most part, I had completely forgotten who I was when I was younger at that point. I was so separated from my past. There was no clear path to who I was as a child to who I am now, or back then. But now that I've been through therapy and everything, and I've allowed myself to admit that I have issues, I've actually reconnected with myself in a big way. And it took until I got to shore duty, which I was still in the military, but I wasn't on a ship after 5 years of being on ships. That's when I was able to start thinking about these things. I just started having rushes of ideas, and I'd be up for 3 days working on music. It was great. But something I've always seen as an issue is the military will admonish you for drinking, but doesn't really give you another option because you can be punished if you report mental health problems. So there's no other choice. That's a big reason why I didn't even seek out or wasn't completely honest during counseling, when I was talking to the chaplain about the issues I was having, because I was afraid to get kicked out and get a bad discharge and not get my GI Bill, so I couldn't go to college like I am right now, because I just wasn't aware. I know of one of my friends who attempted suicide and was later diagnosed as bipolar, and people were claiming that he had faked all of this, they were smarter than the person that diagnosed him that has a doctorate. And it just frustrated me because it was none of their business what he was going through, unless they wanted to be his friend and help him. I'm getting, because he's still getting 70% disability as far as I know, and that's the amount that I'm getting. But it's just such a toxic attitude where you're weak no matter what.
I wonder how much fun life would be if I was constantly bombarded with the truth. The truth about the military is that war is not fun. Killing is not fun. Saying that you have a problem can be a punishable offense.
Now, this is a big reason why I didn't seek help until I got out. And even then, receiving disability from me, sometimes I'll feel guilty I don't deserve it because I've never seen combat, yet I have Xanax in my pocket in case I start having a panic attack. So that's just the mentality that was drilled into me, even though, I wasn't a Marine, I wasn't a soldier, and that was a big way that I realized how much I could connect with other military veterans, because one of the people that helped me out the most was a Marine, but we just understood each other.
It's because the change that takes place happens long before they ever leave boot camp or basic training. In my opinion, there are a couple of things that the military takes out of every soldier, out of every Marine, and it's something that they never really put back. The first thing is empathy, the ability to care about how somebody else is feeling. Now, for me, that makes sense. How can you take a man's life if you're thinking about his family? If you're thinking about his young daughter or his elderly mother that he's caring for? And while that's effective in combat, it's not necessarily effective in your marriage. While the military doesn't take away a soldier's will to live, for some, it takes away their excitement for life. So I meet soldiers who have difficulty feeling, who have difficulty loving, because they've prepared themselves to avoid hurt and sorrow. The second thing that the military takes out of soldiers is comfort in being able to ask for help when you have a problem. For soldiers, the penalty for saying that you have a problem, like post-traumatic stress disorder, is real. The consequences are real. They could lose their security clearance. Their opportunities to get promoted could be limited. They could be found unfit for duty, and ultimately they could be medically boarded out of the military. And just because a soldier is no longer in the armed forces doesn't mean that he doesn't still think like a soldier. After years of being told to suck it up, drink water, and drive on, it's hard for veterans to ask for help.
That's what was odd for me during my first panic attack, or my first real full panic attack, because during the anger attacks I would have in the military, I would tell people to get away and I would always leave the situation. But once I started having panic attacks, I was like actually looking for help. It was like my brain couldn't handle it anymore, and it wanted me to start looking for help from other people. And I remember then, after my first panic attack, I still felt guilty because I was like, oh, it was just anxiety. I shouldn't have wasted their time. When a panic attack is a medical emergency. That's all I really wanted to say with this video. I guess I'm not saying much. I'm adding to what somebody else said, but I don't have much else to add. So as always, if you like my video, subscribe. If you like my music, buy it. And if you hate me, tell everybody. Out.
Pizza boy, pizza. Pizza, pizza. Pizza bonita. Pizza bonita.